what I can, if I'm not out of town.
Good afternoon, everyone. Notice of a public meeting of the Charter Review Committee of the City of Brownsville. The Charter Review Committee of the City of Brownsville will conduct a regular meeting on Thursday, November 10, 2022, at 5:30 p.m. at the City Commission chambers. Members of the public who submitted a public comment form will be permitted to offer public comments as provided by the agenda and as permitted by the presiding officer during the meeting. It is 5:30. Chairman, you may call the meeting to order.
I now call the meeting to order. Billy, do you have,
We have invocation.
would anybody like to stand and make the invocation? Anybody? Any volunteers? I forget what the order is usually.
Invocation and then the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, okay. Pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Honor the Texas flag.
I pledge allegiance to the
Texas,
one
one
state,
state,
under God, one indivisible.
Next item, we have public comment. We did
Well-
not receive any public comment forms.
At this point, I'd like to, we have two new members that need to be sworn in. So if Mr. Cascos and Mr. Merrill, if you please stand. We'll be taking both oaths, the oath of office and the statement of appointed officer. So if you just repeat after me, I state your name. Do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the duties as a member of the Charter Review Committee of the City of Brownsville, Cameron County, State of Texas, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of this state, so help me God. Now for the statement of appointed officer. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I have not directly or indirectly paid, offered, or promised to pay, contributed, or promised to contribute any money or thing of value, or promise any public office or employment as a reward to secure my appointment or confirmation thereof. So help me God. Gentlemen, thank you.
Next item, we have presentation update by City Attorney's Office.
Chairman, board members, thank you again for giving us another one of your evenings for this very important task at hand, which is the Charter Review Committee. Just a quick meeting outline. We're going to have a presentation by our City Attorney's Office, survey over municipally owned utility companies in Texas. I've identified these three cities just based on the diversity of their structure, as the interplay between the charter and ordinance, their population size, and the general fund budget. So we have San Marcos, Lubbock, and Denton that we'll be discussing. Then we'll have a work session based on some questions that were submitted to our City Attorney's Office related to Charter Review Committee matters. And then we have some proposed action items. Again, they are just proposed, but they really are mostly, I think at this point, a discussion and consideration. But if there's any action that would like to be taken, we can take those in reviewing Article 6, Section 1E, which is a removal statute that was identified at the last meeting, and Article 6, Section 3C, which goes to the revenues provision of our charter. And then we'll also discuss future meetings for the CRC and public engagements and any future items, agenda items, and then we'll be adjourned at that point. That takes us into our survey of other municipally owned public utility companies. And just kind of give you perspective as we go into discussing these different structures and just different clauses that are in these various charters and ordinances. Brownsville, just want to put in perspective, population about 180,000, with the general fund revenues just approximately, just is very rough, what I was able to pull up myself from our report is $103 million. San Marcos is a lower population at 68,000 approximately, and a $96 million general fund revenue budget. Then you have Denton, which is a larger population, but still lower than Brownsville at 148,000, but their general fund is about $147 million. And then you have Lubbock, which is at 260,000, and they're very, very healthy general fund in Lubbock at 275 million. And their Lubbock Power and Light alone is 346 million. And then they have separate system for the wastewater, and that generates about 156 million. And so just keep that in consideration as you consider their charters and their ordinances, because that really, you can see how that dictates how they control, and they have a management relationship between the city and their utility company. So for the first one, San Marcos, what they did, and you can see it, is this is it. This is their charter provision. It's very short and to the point. It authorizes, it really sets all the authority with the city to supervise and regulate their utility company. They get to establish rates, terms and conditions, and sale of utility service. They get to establish rules and standards for operations and maintenance, transmission and distribution of facilities. The utility company, the charter gives the city authority to delegate all or some authority to the board, and then that's it. So what you see from San Marcos is that then they go a little bit into detail in their ordinances. And what those ordinances do really just set up that utility company as an advisory board. Again, you can see it's a smaller city, a smaller fund, and so they really do want to have more control over their utility company. But it still has some pretty good recommendations on board composition, eligibility, and removal. As you can see that their composition is made of 2 at-large. I know there was a question, and we'll get to those questions a little bit later, but what is the composition? What does the city want to have as the composition to the utility board? So in this case, San Marcos actually listed as 2 at-large, and then it encourages, but it's not recommended, to have the remaining 3 be a professional engineer, to have somebody in operations and maintenance of a public utility company, and or from the finance and accounting fields. So that's their wish list for their board members. The qualifications: they must be customers of and receive services for electricity and water. And then under San Marcos's ordinance, they can be removed at any time. So then we transition to a very different model, which is the city of Denton. And you'll see the city of Denton, remember their population and budget was much bigger than San Marcos. And I actually served the city of Denton as a deputy city attorney some years ago. So I'm very familiar with their system. All their provisions are in their charter. All right, so the other one we saw where it was very short and to the point, and they covered a lot of their operations and maintenance kind of regulations within their ordinances. But what Denton does is the majority, if not all of their provisions, related to the relationship with their utility company, Denton Municipal Electric, is covered in the charter, and I'll tell you why. In the city of Denton, they have 2-year terms for their council members, and they have staggered elections. So that means you have an election every year. And so to avoid the back and forth of amending ordinances at every election or at the cause of every election, they wanted to establish everything in the charter, which has to be, go through the charter review process or by petition by the voters. And so that's why you see the more controlled, I think, a more controlled approach in being heavily recorded in the charter, like all the things that they wanted to do. But some of the takeaways from the Denton model is the removal process under 12.07. And by the way, let me take a couple steps back. At your podiums, you have copies of these provisions, both the charter provisions and the ordinances. And so they're marked 1, 2, and 3. 1 is San Marcos, 2 is Denton, and 3 is Lubbock. And so you can take those home with you. By the way, City Secretary's office did an amazing job. Your binders, those are your binders to carry with you for the remainder of this committee. It has our contact information from our legal office, along with a copy of our charter. And then now that you have these kind of samples, you can actually put those into your binder. Excuse me. Where was I? Oh, removal process. So on 12.07, here they talk about members of the board may be removed by the council only for cause and after charges have been filed and published, and the member has been given a reasonable opportunity to defend himself in an open public hearing before the council. Not sure that we want to go that route. Again, there was a lot of distrust in the city of Denton between their electorate and the council, and also just the governance in general is a very active community. And so they really went and there were a lot of advocates for transparency, and they want to have all these public hearings. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
When it talks, is there somewhere in Denton's model where they define what a cause is?
No.
Okay. So that's very, whatever. And then it can be removed for cause that no one seems to have a definition for. And after charges have been filed, period, right? So,
So in practice, what they lean into is they have a very robust ethics committee that has subpoena powers and everything. And so they vet everything through that. And that's the tool that they use. It's not in the charter, but that's in practice what they use.
okay, but I guess what I'm suggesting or want to know is that the way this reads, is this it in its totality? What we're looking at right now?
No, well, and if you look at your
Okay.
packet number 2, it has everything there. It has everything governing the Public Utilities Board and all the powers. This is just an excerpt.
Oh, okay.
But
So somewhere in there, it does define what a cause is?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, it does not?
Yeah,
Okay, because
yeah,
that's a concern.
yeah,
And then
certainly.
does it elaborate a little bit more on once, to me, it's like getting, charges are filed, you get removed without being found innocent or guilty? Is that the way I'm reading it?
Right, for
Okay.
cause or not, yeah.
All right.
Right.
Okay.
It definitely is a stress point for them. This came up, it really wasn't a board member. Well, there were employee-related matters that were reviewed under the ethics committee, and some of the board members were questioned, but it never came up to this point.
Just one more, to go back to the prior example, I think, of San Marcos, that one did identify specific backgrounds of appointments,
Yes, sir.
right? But on this one, it does not. It just says if you can run, if you're 18 years old or older and not a
voter.
convicted felon, like city council, you can be appointed, right? There's no educational or career,
Correct.
right? Okay.
Correct. And again, my goal today was kind of just give you a buffet spread of things that we can kind of pick and choose from. Another point, and let's go to the next one. 12.8, it does talk about, and I have it here on the PowerPoint, but just for brevity's sake, I just kind of hit some just the high points. But if you actually look at I think it's the last page, I think it's the last page on your second packet that covers Denton. If you look at 12.8, there's requirements for the Public Utility Board to present on how to present their budget to council for approval every year. And then uniquely under subsection E, the capital improvements must be presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Now, I don't know if you want to, for the city of Brownsville to select a Planning and Zoning Commission as the reviewing body. I think we have our own CIP subcommittee for the city, but possibly some variation of that, of having, big capital improvement programs being submitted to the city for review, every a 5-year plan or whatnot. And then also Denton does establish it as an advisory committee. In practice, the reason why you don't have a lot of complaints is because the city commission actually sits as their DME board right now.
As there what?
So it'd be like if our city commission sat as the PUB board.
So in other words, the city, excuse me, but at the end of the day, the city makes the ultimate decision.
Yes, sir.
So in this model, it is strictly an advisory, like others, just an advisory role. At the end of the day, the city commission is that board because they make the ultimate decision, correct? Unlike what we have right now.
Right, correct. And
Okay.
again, taking into context, like their political environment, their terms of office, their elections, and then just the dynamic they have with their community.
Okay. To add on to that, but the city commission already has to approve anything having to do with rate changes.
Yes,
It goes to their board. Then they decide, yeah, this is a good idea to raise taxes or lower them, and then it comes before the city commission in order
right,
to get it approved.
correct.
So really the having them sit on as a city commission and on the board,
That's
there's no reason for it because, or that would be in a perfect world, the city commissioners are your board for PUB.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry. So you're showing us, this like charter excerpts, right? Do any of these cities have conflict between the charter and the ordinance or what is actually enacted? Because right now, for example, we're looking at this, but we don't know if this is what's actually taking place, right? And,
Right.
and how do we, I guess, how do we, sort of find out? Is it normal for charter and ordinances
Yeah.
of a certain city to?
Yeah, so there's actually, and thank you for saying, because that was one of our questions, and because it involves like the things we're talking about, I'll address it here and then also address it on our questions portion of this workshop. Is that there's, you have these canons and interpretation application of contract terms, or in this case, ordinances. And so you start off with any kind of general terms. What you've seen here is charters are usually written in a general term. So the canon says the general term should be given the general definition. There's also when there's a conflict between the general term and a specific term, the second canon is that the specific term wins. If there's a conflict, the specific term wins. So in this case, if you have just a general statement and it seems to conflict with a more specific term, the specific term is going to win. Now, the third part of that is if the charter is very specific, and we'll see in the Lubbock instance, we'll get to it in a little bit. if you have a specific portion in Lubbock's, and at some point, the ordinances are also very specific, then in this case, you would have, at what I would argue would be the charter would rule over the ordinance, because it's a constitution versus a statute that's legislated by the commission. Hope that answers your question.
Just a question, and just to clarify what an advisory committee amounts to, or an advisory board, how comparable would that be to, in Brownsville, our Parks and Recreation Board and the Airport Advisory Board?
That's a good comparison.
I didn't hear your response, Victor.
It's a good comparison.
Okay.
You're an advisory board as well.
Yes. Let's see where then. So brings us to Lubbock. Lubbock, of course, I think they just revised this. I say just, but like in 2004. But for charters, it's pretty recent. And so their charter actually covers the number of members. It's not R9. They state a general qualification, which is they must be a voter. They set 2-year terms. They state generally what the board can do. The board appoints the general manager, or in their case, the director of electric utilities. In our case, it'd be the general manager. It determines the transfer of net revenues to the city. But then the city, in general terms, sets rates, governs eminent domain, issues debt, and approves the budget. In the charter, it also says, and they probably wrote this as they were making a change, and I wasn't able to discover what that change was, what the previous structure was. But it said, the very last line, other duties and responsibilities, the board shall be as specified by the city council, an appropriate ordinance adopted for such purpose to be effective no later than January 1st, 2005. So coming on the heels of this budget, of this charter amendment. So it's what it did, it said, we're going to give you a 4 corners general terms of what we want the relationship between our utility company and the city to look like. And then later, city commission, city council, we're going to task you with adopting more specific ordinances, to your point, Ms. Almona, more specific ordinances about those roles and responsibilities. And so that's where we get with their ordinances, section 203, and it goes 414 and on. But 413 covers member qualifications. So, after, tonight, when you can't sleep tonight and you want to go through these, they do give some more specific qualifications under 413. It's on the first page of your third packet. The powers of the city council is on section 414, which is on page 2. You have more specific regulations on powers of the board, 415. Then they actually go with more specific duties for the general manager, limits around his job, and then it goes into the disbursement of funds. Let me see if there were any here that I wanted to cover. Get my notes for this one. I think that was it. I've really kind of rushed through these, but now that you've kind of heard kind of the 3 different models, I pulled these because they all, you can kind of see some different variations on qualifications. Whether it's just whether you're of voting age, registered to vote, and you can serve, or you have, you want to have requirements for them being, professional engineers or in the financing world or whatever, what other jobs might relate to it. You also have different structures. I mean, are you gonna, does this committee want to make the long range investment in establishing a lot of these requirements in the charter, like Denton does, or on the San Marcos side, just being very general, period, and just keeping all the powers with the city? Or do you want to, I think Lubbock's a more maybe balanced approach between the two, in having some parameters in the charter, very general terms, and then getting more specific into the city ordinances. And so that's why I selected those three cities. There are a number of other cities, but we wanted to kind of just give you a good survey, a good buffet of different options.
Excuse me, Victor.
Yes.
So with these three examples, we have an opportunity to kind of cherry pick what may fit our community. What I did not see in here was I saw where the city council appoints these members. Is there anything in these where an individual council members makes a recommendation, or by courtesy, they get to appoint, or is it the body as a whole that appoints? I think the way it is here, that a commission member has a courtesy appointment, and then everybody just kind of, for the lack of a better word, rubber stamps it without really vetting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's kind of what you see throughout.
Yeah, so, but in these that you gave, is there anything, hidden in the weeds that calls for an individual appointment, or is it all by the body?
All by the body.
Okay. Is there any language here having to do with a simple majority or a super majority to appoint?
No, not that
Okay.
I've seen, and,
Okay.
and not in most of that I've seen. The ones that I have seen, I think it was San Antonio's, that actually said majority, but
And then-
by default, it would be.
Yeah, one last thing on I didn't read anywhere where there was one that I could see, there was a removal process for a cause that seems to be a little bit, nebulous. But the way I understand it now is it's very difficult to remove a board member, correct? And I think, I keep reading stuff one a year, whatever, but do any of these, I think I saw one where I think it said that they serve at the pleasure of the city council.
Right.
Is that correct?
Very general terms. I think it was San Marcos.
Correct? Okay. All right. Thanks.
And, Mr. Gascos, we have our chapter 38 where we could essentially, the Ethics Advisory Commission could make recommendations for board appointment removals. But that would require both a charter revision and probably a tweak to chapter 38 to account for different violations.
Ethics violations?
Yeah, because as it is right now, it's just any kind of perceived personal, direct or indirect
Is that what we have now?
profit, right, for chapter 38.
Is that what we have now?
Correct.
A charter, Trump, I don't use the word trumps, okay. A charter amendment or a charter overrides an ordinance, is that correct?
Correct.
As long as it doesn't violate the state constitution.
Correct.
Correct? So did I read somewhere here that these members serve at the pleasure of the city council?
San Marcos does that. Denton does a for cause. And Lubbock doesn't, I don't think
I didn't see
I
anything
didn't
that
see anything about
talked
removal of
about it.
theirs.
Okay, so one you have that they do, one it's for cause, and the other one is kind of silent on it, right? Okay, thank you.
So thank you for presenting these examples that you selected. I'm wondering if there are any sort of maybe best practices out there, perhaps by a body that does research and policy on these things, such as the Texas Municipal League. There might be other bodies, right? And just what they recommend. I mean, the examples you presented are good, but they don't really give us an idea of like what most cities that function well are doing, right?
We actually have our deputy city attorney actually worked as general counsel for TML.
Yeah, I was gonna say TML does not have anything in-house as of February. I don't know if they have anything now, but as of February, they had nothing in-house. And as a matter of fact, any questions that came in regarding utilities, or utility districts or municipally owned utilities were referred out. I think there is a utility association.
It's like FUI.
Yes, And so I think we're becoming a member of that
Yes, hopefully by.
pretty
end of summer.
soon, but yeah, TML wouldn't have anything, but this association might.
And the other point I would add, Mr. Mora, is the point in kind of bringing the context of these different municipalities and their population size and their general fund and kind of the brief description about their kind of political context is that every city is going to be different. You're going to have big utility companies, you have huge utility companies, and the best practice is just going to be what's best for you, for Brownsville. Because as you can see, the communities differ. And I really try to get a good poll. That's why I included Denton. I think Denton's around about where Brownsville is kind of, but in population almost, but not quite in budget. That's why I picked San Marcos, because it's more reflective of our budget, but not our population. And then I also added Lubbock because I think kind of Lubbock, from all the ones that are out there, aside from like your San Antonio, like your Metroplex, big Metroplex areas, that their provision would be much robust because of the resources and the size of enterprise that they have. So that's why I kind of gave you like those three to kind of give a best practices between the three, where like Mr. Casco said, we could pick and choose what works best for our situation. Mr. Cardenas?
Yeah, because I read what we got last week, like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And everyone, we're here because of the whole Tenasca outcry. That our city commission doesn't have a hand into PUB. But as city commissioner and mayor get elected, they get to appoint someone onto the board there for 4 years, correct? I think it's a 4-year term?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it's a 4-year term. And you can't remove them because let's say I'm a commissioner and I put one of my friends here on the board and I get mad at him after a year at a party and say, you know what, I'm going to remove you from the board. Which we'd have 4 different, that person can pick 4 different people in 4 years or 5 or 6, depending on, the disagreements that they have. But everything comes back to the city commission. Anything having to do with rate changes, approval of subsidies, everything. So it's not that I don't understand, it's that if it's been working like the way it's already written for so many years up to this point, and yes, we may need to reword a couple of things to maybe say, hey, you know what? It becomes an ethics thing, if I'm not mistaken. So-and-so did something wrong. Well, you know what? We need to pursue it ethically. And then I believe there's removal already in the words here that if that factor and it's presented and they are found guilty, they can be removed.
Well, currently the way it's stated, like Mr. Casas was saying, again, you have 2 specific provisions. And we have the charter provision that's specific about 1 removal every 12 months based on supermajority vote. And then you also have the specific portion in Chapter 38, which says any violation considered by the EAC, they can recommend a removal, and then the city commission can remove it. So in that case, the charter provision would win in that case. And so that's why you would have to amend, I think it's 1E, right?
Yeah.
Article 6, 1E, about the removal provisions. But you did bring up a good point about the city being able to have the authority to approve rate changes.
Yeah.
But our charter is a little different in that those based on recommendation by PUB. the way
Like,
it's-
correct.
So really the rate change recommendations, the authority rests with PUB. And then all the city can do is affirm or deny that.
Okay.
The city can't initiate those rate changes.
Okay. On that, where the PUB board, once they come to their decision, still has to come to the city.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in that case, the intent behind that rule is in case they want to increase rates for some project, the
Correct.
city has the authority to say, no, we don't want you, we don't want
Exactly.
our ratepayers to pay more.
Which they've raised our rates.
Right.
Or it's already come before the commission for a rate change
It just doesn't work on the other way around.
on the other way around.
If the
Exactly.
city wants to reduce the rates, we don't have the authority to require that PUB have their board approve the rate reduction and then come back.
And let's say if any subsidies, which I didn't see it in there, any subsidies that they wish to garnish into, say, helping the taxpayer that comes before the PUB.
I think
Because they have to
those- I
approve it
think-
in order-
I think those are governed right now through our city ordinances.
Okay.
Different
Excuse me,
programs.
just a couple of things.
Yes, sir.
And I think Vito brought up some good points in terms of that, but I think that for those of us that were on the charter review the last time, before the challenges that we have before us regarding, ABC, we talked about very briefly about PUB. So this was like 2 years ago, before any of these things happened. So we kind of anticipated back then, but if y'all remember, there was a rush to get these items for the May ballot or May election. So we cut the discussions on PUB in hopes that at some point we'd come forward and talk about PUB, and here we are, right?
Here we are.
But
The same board.
we did discuss it. So
Yes, we
really,
did.
it didn't have anything to do with what's occurring now. So I think we kind of anticipated, because we were listening to things. Now, in order for the way I'm envisioning this is that we could potentially have 4 or 5 amendments, all related to PUB on the ballot. It's not gonna be just one thing, vote yay, nay. It's gonna be like several.
Right.
So we gotta make sure that they don't, one passes and all of a sudden the second one, outdoes it. So we have to be very careful in how that gets worded. But I think to your point, and just speaking for myself, that the way that some of this can be addressed by having a removal process.
Yeah.
Pretty much on any appointments from the state level on down, you serve at the pleasure of a body or a governor or something, right? Maybe the way to keep the politics out of it, you require a supermajority of 5 to affirmatively recommend or take away a board member. And that hopefully takes, if there's a change in, you get mad at me, you want to take me off.
Exactly.
Well, you better get 4 others to affirmatively do that.
Exactly.
I think I think that may solve a lot of the.
Yeah, Mr. Costa was going to add something to that. Because
Please.
It's been in discussion is, if we could also add the part of those, a supermajority of those present and voting.
He's got 5 affirmative votes.
Because,
Right.
well, maybe not 5, right? Because if there are any conflicts.
5 affirmative votes. I think, if we start,
Out
we
of
live in a
7.
small
Because-
town, you're always gonna have a conflict with somebody,
Yeah.
Right.
but I see what you're saying, and that's something that we can discuss a little bit later to determine what a conflict is.
Sure.
But if we get to that point, then if there's a conflict, that person shouldn't have been appointed to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? So that may be a moot point. unless, somebody, I appoint you and you marry my sister and then I leave and somebody else comes in or something.
Right.
I see, then that would create a problem. But if there's a conflict going in and that member is still here, there's a conflict coming out
Right.
as well.
But,
So,
but.
but I see what you're saying.
But also for argument's sake, right, is the appointment of them is just by majority. So you could get an instance to where that person who's conflicted out says, hey, I'm not voting for this person, and they still have a majority that votes them in, but then when it comes to the removal process, now it requires a supermajority, and that person.
Well, I think it should be a supermajority going in, coming out. And I'll tell you why, because you could have all of a sudden 5 abstentions for whatever reason. All of a sudden you could technically have 1 or 2 people appoint a member, and that goes to almost any committee. And you could have 3 or 4 abstentions, and all of a sudden you've got a very, very small minority of the city commission approving these things. I think that's something
really good point.
that warrants some discussion, but I think a supermajority protects.
In and out, and
In
that
and out.
avoids the problem later down.
Yeah, and I think but again, the way these charter amendments are going to read, we can make them as, people don't read them. And if they're going to take up half of a column of a ballot, that's kind of unfair to the voter too. So we need to keep it as simple as we can. But I'm just suggesting this so as we move forward, we think about these things because I'm expecting at least 4 or 5 different subjects, one supermajority, to appoint, to take off. Now, it is going to take away the authority if we move forward of every city commissioner having a say in who gets appointed. We can still, I think that can be left there, but it's still going to require that they get 4 votes to do it. Yeah, I think that's the problem that PUB's had as of late. That, I was telling somebody earlier, I said, these may be great folks, out in their own environment, but but when you get to that level, this is a first tier appointment. When you get to that level, they may or not have the background, that's why I think you get in trouble because you're relying on administration telling you things. And if you don't have a basic concept or knowledge, you're going to say, okay, because you don't know. I mean, that's not anybody's fault other than not educated.
So we do have, we're having a lot of discussion on the removal part of it. We do have an action item later on that it's set for discussion and consideration. We can continue it for that one. And then quite possibly have some kind of action to take on it at that point. And I'm also hearing from the discussion an interest in qualifications. As you saw in one, I think it's Denton's, or I'm confused now, but
One of them requires, I think, a professional engineer.
it's like 2 at large, and it does, the thing about that though, right, it says it encourages, because at the same time, if there aren't enough to choose from, but there is at least a memorialization that we're going to look for those in the financial community. We're going to look for those in the engineering fields, maybe auditing fields as well. And so you can add those as encouraging.
Victor, if I may, let me interrupt you real quick. Ask a question. Is there a requirement right now that a PUB board member needs to represent a particular, because you mentioned at large, a particular district? They have to come from that district?
Yep.
That's something that we may want to talk about too, because I think some of the challenges and concerns we hear is that everybody may live on the north side or the west side, and the east side or the south side has no representation.
And that's what Denton does. They say that you have to meet all the qualifications of the commission.
Okay, so if you have districts, then that person, well, okay.
Well, I
Has to live in that
I
district.
understand.
comment on that.
Yeah.
I serve on another board where we have to look for people based on, one of the things is based on where they live. And it is very difficult
It is.
to find,
Like people.
or, right,
No doubt.
so you're adding, qualifications, perhaps education, perhaps a background in something or the other, and then you're going to restrict to where they live. We're gonna end up with
Yeah, I
very
think
specific things.
if you do it to where, I think there's 2 at large on one of the models, or a couple of at large. Maybe those at larges would be the requirement when you, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, a professional engineer, whatever, an engineer or pick a career outside of a lawyer. But let's say an engineer, maybe a CPA or a banker, those could be the at-large positions and, from everywhere. And then when you come to the district level, there won't be any professional criteria that's needed. It's vote, live in the district, they've got a PB meter or whatever it is.
And right now
That takes care of that.
Right now, as a city commission, we have our 3 at-larges and then 4 districts.
Right, so you could have, so at those at-larges is where you could, to avoid the concern that your other group has, that is where if we go that route, where you got to have a professional in there, would be the at-large ones. And then when you get to District 1, 2, 3, then it can be whomever that the city council wants to appoint.
Mr. Mayor?
It's been on my mind a lot, but clearly, y'all have given a lot of thought to how we might go forward in very specific way. I just feel compelled at this point to say a couple of quick, I hope I can keep it down to a paragraph. The the history of PUB and the history of the charter amendment that created PUB, to me, is important. Good government, for all of us Democrats, good government is an evolutionary process. And just because it's in the charter doesn't mean it cannot be revised. But it is nonetheless an evolutionary process that has to have some respect for history. And the history for the charter amendment that adopted the fact that PUB was not sold to Central Power and Light is important. The perspective that was brought about at that time by some pretty important people in town was that the city should keep it and the voters got to choose. And it was a narrow vote, by the way, pretty narrow vote. Other things that historically have happened in that same time frame since the charter amendment that created the PUB as we see it was things like the decision to discourage Southwest Airlines from coming to Brownsville and the decision to not buy into Gateway Bridge and let the Cameron County people have the whole thing. And I bring that up not because it's criticism of anything that's happened in the past, but the environment in which all this was undertaken was important. There was a reason why people felt we should not be able to replace the board casually or at the wake up one morning, get rid of the board and start over. Now, since then, and in the very recent past, the city commission has made the decision to do exactly that with a couple of really important boards here in Brownsville. And I think we've had the good fortune that those decisions have been carried out very effectively and in the best interest of the community. So I'm not opposed to making changes to the process, but I am very interested in seeing to it that we understand why we have the commission or the charter the way it is today. The other thing that I was going to mention, and I don't know if it really, Mr. Trevino, I don't know if it would really matter or not, but one of the biggest mistakes in all of Texas electrical history was 2 years ago, and ERCOT failed miserably. I think our role from PUB perspective was that we were able to continue to produce, but not able to deliver to our own citizens in some cases, which was unfortunate, but maybe ERCOT has some best practices that are being implemented in other organizations around the state that would help us. I don't think the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, for instance, would be of any particular use, but perhaps ERCOT. Those are the things that I wanted to mention.
Mr. Merrill, you bring up a good point, and we're trying to partner with different coalitions that would be able to provide additional resources or recommendations. And like Mr. Torino had said, we're actually going to be presenting an item on the December agenda to join the Texas Coalition for Cities for Utility Issues. And so what they do, it's a coalition of utilities, of cities across Texas that own utilities. And so anytime there's a challenge within a certain city within that coalition, they come together, they help, it's a bunch of attorneys, they help write amicus briefs. If there's ever a appellate court challenge, the coalition will actually submit a brief in support. When McAllen took on the state with the co-location ordinances that they had, Tuckfooey supported them with that and their efforts in challenging their ability to regulate locally. What was that?
With McAllen and the what location?
Co-location of small cell nodes.
Okay.
McAllen imposed an ordinance that allegedly violated FCC requirements, and so there was a whole preemption argument. Anyway, I won't go into that. But the point to me bringing that up is that Tuckfooey is very instrumental in providing resources and support for city-owned utilities, and we're going to join them. I think City Commission is going to authorize it first meeting of December.
David, you mentioned something about Southwest Airlines. Could you repeat that? Just so I missed it, sorry. Yeah.
I apologize. In point of fact, the prevailing opinion is that Southwest Airlines initially offered to be in Brownsville, and that the city commission
Okay, the city commission is the one, okay.
rejected them. It wasn't the PUB.
Yeah.
And I was casting aspersions on, or I was trying to emphasize the point that professional management and an autonomous or semi-autonomous board can protect against decisions that are entirely political.
Yes.
Rather than just good business.
Yep, I agree.
So, Mr. Merrill, going to our next agenda item, which is questions presented by the CRC members. um, t- The relationship between PUB and COB, I think what I'm hearing from everybody is that it's going to be a good soft point, midpoint, right? We don't want to, for the city to take on all the roles and responsibilities, like, what was the first city I had up here?
It's like,
San Marcos, right?
yeah, where the,
And at the same time, we don't want to have, be the city of Denton where it's micromanaging, um, everything either about what can be done or not done. So it's going to be some kind of flex between those two. The criteria and manner in which PUB members should be removed, I think we'll kind of get to that at the first action item. Desired length of service, is that of interest as we kind of go along with this discussion? The length of service of PUB members, does anybody have a comment on that?
no, on that, it's 4 years. I
Right
guess
now.
it's the serving term of the commissioner sitting,
Yeah, the only other thing I've seen is like 2 years.
yeah.
That seems to be a bit short.
Yeah, but the
I
thing is-
agree, it's a little too short.
Yeah.
It takes you just 2 years to really understand what is going on in an organization as large as PUB. This is an unpaid board, right? People who have families, who have jobs, and we're asking a lot of them to dedicate time to go to the meetings and learn. But it really does take about 2 years for them to be fully on, like fully invested in what is happening. So less than 4 years would be a detriment to the service that they can give.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it not the case that in the past, you could be appointed and reappointed? That's one thing.
Right.
And there was no term limit, but you could be appointed and reappointed and even reappointed if the commissioner preferred.
You guys know, we have reappointment on.
And then, is it not possible that because of the changes in election sequence versus appointments, that you could actually have a city commissioner serve a full term without ever having the option to appoint a board member to PUB? Which
and-
is,
We can find out if this has happened.
It has, well, yeah, because I think back 4 years ago or 8 years ago, there was one of the city commissioners had the appointment and they all voted against it and then put in an appointment from one of the other commissioners.
Well, that's why you go back to the supermajority to appoint and to unappoint, okay? And you leave it up to not an individual commissioner to appoint, but the body to appoint.
Yeah.
Versus an individual commissioner, which I think would solve that particular issue.
But I think that's what happened in that
Yeah,
instance.
I remember
is-
that.
Yeah, there was one commissioner that made the appointment, but everyone voted against it. And then I believe it was the mayor's appointment that got in, and he had 2 appointments on the board of PUB.
You know, I think the other one, I don't know if y'all want to talk about that at this point or during, is maybe also precluding an outgoing, let's say someone's term limited out, like we've already passed, appointing somebody with 1 month left in their term and tying it up for the next member coming in, not be able to appoint anybody for 4 years if we leave it at 4 years.
Yeah.
But the supermajority might also take care
Yeah,
of that.
that supermajority takes care of a lot of things, I think, and relieves a lot
And
of headaches.
And the thing too is I'm sorry, Daisy. The thing too is the board the board member to PUB has 4 years, and if that commissioner that put him on there doesn't get reelected, well, that's going to be an empty spot for the commissioner coming in.
Well, that's why, this is somewhat, I mean, we could find all kinds of scenarios to this.
Yeah.
But I think that's why if we go down the supermajority route, it should take care of that. And also, if they're not individual city commission appointments, they can make a recommendation, Anybody can,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be that particular, what's that commissioner's turn. Whenever it comes up, any commissioner is welcome to make a recommendation. But it's, but they got to garnish 4 other votes to do that. I
Yeah.
think that makes it fair versus somebody's coming in and they have an automatic appointment to PUB. Because as we've seen in the past,
Yeah.
that sometimes, people that get appointed really don't have the expertise or the backgrounds to serve at that level. Nothing to say bad, that's just the way it is.
And Mr. Cascos, I think maybe, to your point also, Mr. Merrill, is the history of it. Maybe it started off that way and it's kind of gradually in practice been a one commissioner, one.
It's more of a courtesy than it is an
right,
ordinance or a
Exactly.
charter.
Practice,
Yeah,
right.
it's turned into a courtesy.
That's right.
Right.
It is a courtesy and we've seen what courtesies have gotten us into.
And I just checked, Jennifer was able to confirm it's one term of 4 years plus only one reappointment. And I think that's fine.
I'll just tell you 2 more things about that. The one is I don't have an objection to somebody serving 8 years. I think that there's a point at which you don't want to serve too far, but the other thing I would just kind of mention is based on my age and experience, I would say that incremental change is better than massive change. And I'm not against changing the way things are at all, but a wholesale baby with the bathwater type thing is not as comfortable for me as an incremental change that offers improvement to the standards that we expect from the board and the communication that's offered to the city commission.
Thank you. That is a great point. I think I'll echo what some of you have said already, which is we were, as a charter review committee, we were talking about this 2 years ago, about PUB and sort of changes that needed to happen. We all saw them as incremental. And now there is a lot more, public attention on PUB because of the audit, which I think the audit is a great example of things working. They worked the way they were supposed to. The city commission asked for an audit and it was done. And that really is what the city commission is there for. It does have oversight. It is working, right? They do approve
Exactly.
rate increases. So right now we have the task of one, looking at the audit that the city commission had asked for and got done, and to try to understand what are the things that went wrong, and what are the things that could be addressed by the charter. A lot of really the bulk of what went wrong has nothing to do with being able to the inability to remove board members, really. Even though there is a clause, right, that only one person every 12 months, et cetera, can be removed. But that really is not the bulk of the problem. That's not the reason why everybody is thinking about this. So we really have to think about it more globally, and we have to anticipate the challenges that PUB will need to address as we can expect another 2021. We can expect another major climate crisis that if it doesn't happen in 2023, it will happen in 2024. It's something that really we need to be ready for, and we have to keep that in mind and think about this globally, and not try to focus on the things that did not cause the problem and did not are not going to help us get to the level where we need to be in terms of the city, in terms of our utilities.
Yeah, I think the city is very fortunate to have every member on this board serving today, because, I mean, we see it all the time in drafting, not just ordinances or charters, but contracts, bylaws for corporations. You see a lot of times where people try to amend something to correct a past mistake, and they end up causing issues going forward that are 2 or 3 times fold, just because they didn't kind of have that foresight, or like Mr. Modi said, the global perspective about the issue. So, and also Mr. Merrill's point about, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Unintended consequences, certainly. I think we've received a lot of really good information. I know Jen's our great note taker. We have some stuff to go back to. I think it actually, all these comments are great because whether Mr. Tijerina knew it or not, he kind of was into everybody's brain. These questions came from him. Also, Ms. Zamora, you sent some questions about the conflict of different charter. If you have any questions, we'll continue to have this section for our committee meetings, and we can discuss these a little bit further into detail. I don't want to cut anybody off, but anybody, because we'll go to our action items after this, but.
Just to follow up
Yes, sir.
what was just said, this is a rhetorical question, but do we believe that the amendments of the charter, if enacted, would prevent what has happened over the last several years? The answer is no. Okay? So we have to, with that in mind, these amendments are not, I don't think would have changed anything. It all goes to the integrity of the folks that are there on a day-to-day basis. So no matter.
Actually, since you did ask, perhaps not an amendment, but following the charter as it's written, as opposed to an ordinance, specifically for Article 4, where it talks about the city finances and in respect to PUB. That might actually have prevented some of this, but I
Well,
apologize for cutting you off.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't think anybody knew what the finances were. I just don't, I as one don't believe that whatever amendments we come up with, whatever they are. Now, I don't know if this charter is also going to talk about the transfer of monies. I don't think it is.
It talks about it already. It's vague. It's at
Yeah,
subsection
okay.
F. It just talks about that the board will determine the transfer of net revenues over to the city. And that's all it says. Some of these other cities, I think Lubbock actually identifies a set amount, 5% of 1%.
And I believe we're getting 10% from PUB?
I believe so.
Yeah.
But that's again, a decision. I've been trying to track it, but I think that's a determination made by PUB to get to this.
Now, and we've all heard this about giving the ratepayers the opportunity to select their providers. Would that also be part or potentially part of a charter amendment to
I think-
allow a
So-
PUB customer to go
So-
out and try to get a best rate from CP&L or Reliant or somebody to do that? Is that part of this discussion as well?
I don't think
Only in
so.
the sense that we would have to restructure the entire Article 6.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that would not be part of this to
No.
allow for
Uh,
free enterprise to come in and do something? Well, let
Yeah.
me take it a step further.
We can consider it. It's just, I think with the kind of the plan that was kind of put before the board, it was kind of like, how do we modify and correct what we have right now? That would be a huge undertaking.
Yeah,
We
I understand.
We would have to, bring in FAs, financial advisors of how it would impact.
Well, in case
operations.
one was going to get asked,
Sure,
why
sure.
can't we pick, our own provider like other communities do? And my response said, look, I don't have any problem with that as long as that new provider is going to subsidize whatever we would have lost, the city would have lost of getting from PUB.
Right.
Or if they're getting $1 million from this neighborhood and,
Yeah.
Reliant comes in and said, you got to supplement what we would have lost.
And to bring a point of clarification, Lubbock does a good point of just putting it out there, that it's not a kind of a give me to the city. It's a franchise. It's a replacement for a franchise fee, which for all utility waste collection, solid waste, any kind of utility uses of our property, we charge a franchise fee. And so in lieu of a franchise fee, this is what the city gets in return from.
Let me ask one more question.
Yes, sir.
PUB operates as an enterprise fund, correct?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Right? Okay. So it transfers monies to the city's general fund, correct?
Correct.
And that is used to subsidize the general fund, correct?
So it's
Yeah, if
part
it's
of-
coming into the general fund,
It does, yes.
right? It does. Has anyone calculated the amount of the property tax increase would have to be to
No, sir.
make up that
No, sir.
subsidy?
No, we haven't. No.
That'd be something that'd be interesting to know, That if, some people, well, why is the PUB transferring money to the city? Why isn't it more? How much of that, you know, if it stopped altogether, how much would the city have to raise taxes to make up that difference?
Right.
The city's tax rate is what, 70 cents per hundred?
I
Come on,
wouldn't know.
guys.
I know,
I mean, I don't
Well,
remember.
okay, in my research,
Yeah, I mean, I think it
Yeah,
is.
That's
Because-
something that we can look into.
the-
But just going back to the rates, and I know there's been a lot of emotion about, you know, how high the bills were, et cetera, but, I literally went through all of the data, and PUB was the lowest, rate, for any of the other, companies that are available right now. So from the 11, I did 12 months back in August, and 11 out of the 12 months, PUB was the lowest rate.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. I mean, that's data.
I
right? So-
researched that too. And the thing is our city government is not going to raise the taxes in the city. What they do is convince PUB to raise their taxes because they're getting a subsidy from them at 10%
Their rates.
for the
Raising
rates. Yeah. So that's why it saves face for our city commission and mayor. They say, well, I didn't raise your taxes, you know, PUB did. But no, it comes before the city commission in order to say, yes, we approve this because they're getting the
Well,
subsidy from them.
Right, and
Well,
but
well,
it's really unfair,
I-
actually.
I'll say that's kind of in part, right? Because we.
Yeah, the city can't recommend, we just said it earlier, right?
Like,
The
like,
city
well,
can't
because
recommend the
anytime
rates.
you use city property, anybody, and if it's AT&T, Time Warner, if they're gonna go into our property, they pay us a franchise fee.
Correct.
And so that's at a set rate. And so with PUB, instead of saying, we're gonna charge you a set franchise fee, the ordinance says PUB board, we're gonna, I'll bring, can you find it for me, Jen? I think it's like subsection F of expenses.
Yep. Well, while you're looking for that, because the whole uprise is this Tenasca. And everyone that's been sitting on that board, you know, they want a fall guy on it. They want, or the city wants a way to remove one of their board members that were appointed by the city.
They do have a way now, right? I don't understand why they haven't exercised.
Yeah, they do on, if I read it correctly, there
Yeah.
is a path that they can say that, okay, for just cause.
Well, and back to the other, your previous point also is the finances of PUB. Currently, right now, there's no oversight on the budget, on their budget. PUB has sole discretion on establishing their budget, their CIP projects, et cetera. They're required to give one annual report to the city and that's it. But as you've seen in the other kind of examples, there are some provisions in the charters where they require an approval or review of the budget process for the utility company to come before the city commission.
Yeah, but
Kind of
I-
like with,
I don't
kind of like
think
with G.
it's
Bickens.
particularly accurate. So the city does have oversight. It may not choose to enforce it. It may, the city can
No,
require.
The other
more-
cities do. Brownsville doesn't have that authority right now.
Then how did it do the audit?
So the way that we did the audit was we contracted a third-party person and we requested emails and certain documents from them that was approved, it was approved by their legal counsel. But that's all that's,
So you're saying that it doesn't have oversight, yet it's able to request an audit? You said, why is that
I
different?
think you're getting
Well,
to the point there.
well,
I
I-
think
I-
the point that Mr. Coscos was raising is exactly the point. What could we include in the charter going forward that would reduce, because you cannot eliminate, but reduce the probability or possibility of a similar set of circumstances in the future? And that,
Well,
it may well be that you would want to fire somebody, but it might also
Yeah.
be some other
I mean,
provision.
Well, one of the things that I understand is, there was an NDA, right, between the board or PUB and Tenasca, and that's what, part of the reason why the commission was not in the loop. So if there's a way that, the NDAs can be extended to the city commissioners, I would say that, might be one way, right? At least that they're aware of, you know, a bigger
Yeah,
project. or
that really
something like
goes to the whole communication gap because we don't advise, like legally, we don't advise them. They have their own legal counsel. They have their own auditor. They have their own finance team. Unless we do, the city does third-party financial audits every year. It's just
Well,
that,
Victor,
No, I don't say financial audit. I mean, the non-disclosure agreement was between Tenasca and PUB. And that's why the city was not in the loop, but wouldn't it be okay for the city commission to be an extension of that NDA?
for sure, it would have helped out in this case, but I guess my point is there's no way for the city.
but you don't
to
have that
know.
mechanism in place now.
We don't have it, but
Right.
and there's no way for us to know if there was an NDA or not. Like, they could have just not told us. And
Well,
Is
it
right
was
now,
in the report, so.
do city staff ever show up to PUB meetings?
No.
not that I'm aware of.
Do city staff like show up to like the financial committee
Committee, no.
of PUB? Nothing? And why is that? Is it because the city's not allowed to go or because the city?
No, I don't think there's never been anybody that says not to go. I do know that I've been made aware that there's been invitations to have the city manager's office attend. I'm not sure
You
why they
know,
haven't
Victor,
attended.
let me ask, I think we're going in a direction that the way I'm hearing it is that there appears to be very little legal oversight over PUB. That's what I'm hearing. The PUB is, you got the tail wagging the dog, in essence, okay? And what I'm hearing is that there's nothing to preclude city administration from attending every PUB meeting and listening. There's nothing to preclude the city being involved in the budgetary process. They just don't do it. And maybe they should, okay? But the way it works now, if I understand it right, the PUB adopts a budget with no input from the city. Now, is that by design, by ordinance, or is that by choice? And that's what we kind of need to know. Is it something that the city can do? You know, keep in mind that when PUB started back in the 60s, it was supposed to be an extension of the city of Brownsville. And somewhere that translation got lost. So to answer Daisy's question, I think that the city does have the authority to review a budget. And they may not have a say-so in whether it gets adopted or not, but at a minimum, they've got the authority. Anybody, any member of the public has the authority to go. I mean, I've looked at the city budget, I've looked at the city audit, I've looked at the PUB's budget. You know, anybody can go online and look at it. The city has chosen, or let me say, the city, I think as a whole has chosen maybe not to do it because everything appeared to be functioning properly until these things happen. Then all of a sudden, it's like you opened up Pandora's box. Now everything is wrong. I don't believe that everything is wrong. Okay. I just think that some things happened and maybe the city should have had more oversight.
Yeah, one thing that, to ensure that is quite possibly if, because it's leaning towards that way, right, is Lubbock, I think, appoints, just like the mayor is,
Ex officio?
ex officio, they have the city manager as ex officio.
I saw that. They have two. Well, I mean, again, and there's nothing, I mean, the city managers have, you know, a lot of stuff on their plate, but maybe the city should have
Or their designee, like.
yeah, maybe the city, I mean, maybe the city should have the mayor and one or two commissioners that also sit as ex officio members, at least to listen
I
and
would-
hear,
Well, I
Or
see your point,
dedicated
but also like from the.
or staff, yeah.
There's just so much information, like financial, institutional information.
Yep.
That the city manager's office would have, because they're preparing their budgets, their city budgets, and their interactions with, because there's other services that are.
Yeah, but look, the
provided
budget, the budget gets, you know, you work on the budget for about maybe 90 days. Okay, and then you adopt it and you're done for 6 or 7 months, unless, we're not talking about making budget amendments and doing all that stuff, but I think it would be important to have somebody, or maybe, I don't know if that would even be a charter amendment.
No.
I don't know if it rises to that level, but I think that somebody
Wait.
should.
You would want it if you want them to be an ex officio board member.
Well, that's already
Yeah.
in there,
Because if
But
not,
the city.
the mayor.
For the mayor, but if you wanted to
Correct.
add the city, like a
Correct.
management position to it, that's where it would be a good place to put in the charter, so you would ensure that whether PUB wanted to or not, that person would have a seat at the table.
But again, it's not that PUB, from what I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may be. But from what I'm understanding, it's not that PUB is sort of keeping a lot of the information secret, perhaps with that NDA.
We don't
You
ask.
know, that was the case. But overall, there's like all these things, right, like are accessible to the city. Is more like this, there's no communication in place. Now, I mean, that comes down to management, really.
But I can't kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know the intentions or thoughts of management, but to your point, is there anything in the charter that precludes the city staff from attending committee meetings or involvement at public meetings? No, there's not.
And so I have another question. And you may not know this, but how often does PUB have external audits? Not a forensic audit, so every year.
Every year, every year.
And
So the city and PUB both have to have their own audits? Right.
And not necessarily by the same firm.
No.
Correct.
But they're separate.
Yeah, so to make it easy on us, all we'd have is do what I think one of the towns did where all the city commission and that the city commissioners became the board members. I mean,
that does
the-
not
the
sound like a
out-
good
yeah, I
thing.
know. The outcry is, oh, we don't have control of it. Well, sit on the board. You have all the control. I mean, and they do have control.
You know, there are some governmental entities where they have like irrigation districts or drainage districts where the members of that county commission, as an example, are also the board members. Well, didn't the city just do that with one of these boards? Was it GBIC or
GBIC.
CIC or somebody
GBIC.
where they
GBIC.
wiped everybody out and they became the board members?
Right.
It was
Right?
GBIC.
Okay. Now,
Exactly.
let me ask you, to go back, would it be possible on this charter amendment to have, in the word that we use has got to be very, very specific. It cannot be a may, it should be a shall, where the city ratifies their budget? Can that be one of the amendments where they shall ratify the budget? I mean, they're already approving rate increases, correct? They have
Yes.
to approve them?
Yeah.
Why is it that they cannot ratify and adopt not only their budget, but also salary increases to top level management? So the city can have some oversight into what some of these folks are getting. I'm not saying don't pay them,
Well, yeah,
but the city should be responsible for ratifying that.
but that's a self-sustaining entity. It's
It
not.
doesn't matter. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter. I mean,
Well, so we would have to kind of go and clean up some things because the way the charter currently is written is that they have to be treated as a private corporation, their own standalone private corporation. That's like it actually like listed. I think
yeah, but
a
that's
bit
why,
much.
but that's why we're doing this, because we are not treating it like a different, separate entity by virtue that we're going to make changes to the charter. It's changing, okay? So, and maybe the reason that we've had some of the challenges with PUB is because the city has let them operate as, you know,
Corporation.
a Lone
Yeah.
Ranger out there doing their own thing. And who knows what else is out
Well,
there.
and to Mr. Merrill's point, we're talking about the history, like back then, that
Yeah,
was,
there's
that
a
was the intent
historical
back in the
reason
seventies
for it.
when it got.
There's a really good historical reason. Just, can I ask a quick question about,
sir.
am I correct in my understanding that the city of Brownsville does have an internal auditor?
Yes.
That it does?
It does.
We do have an internal auditor.
Yes.
Does the
So does
PUB have an internal auditor?
Yes.
They have their own, yes.
What if the city was the one that hired the internal auditor at the PUB?
Well, I mean,
The only reason I ask is if you want, and I think to heart what you said, that the whole point of this exercise is to try to get to a point where we don't have it happen again. If the city of Brownsville owns the internal audit, maybe we get more information to the city commission on a timely basis. And the structure or the framework under which everybody works is more transparent.
Or, yeah, David, internal audit, the internal auditor works for the board, not for the administration. That's the way it normally works. So I think that'd be a great idea to have the internal auditors, because they need more than one, answer to both the PUB board and the city commission. that would not be a bad idea. But right now, they only answer to the, just like the city
the board.
internal auditors answer to the city, and PUB's internal answer only
Yeah,
to
and
them.
that's the way
Right.
you would want it unless you were concerned, if there were a concern that there wasn't sufficient information coming through, that might be one channel that would open up.
Yeah, but,
That's
and
all.
the paperwork from that internal audit is accessible to the city, isn't it?
Did what? I'm sorry?
From PUB,
No, we don't get, the city doesn't get anything.
but
No,
is it
it's-
accessible?
Well,
It should be.
we
should
had
be,
to
if you
request.
put it on there.
Technically, to PUB's credit, they didn't object to any of our requests, but they could have objected it. They never objected to any request that they asked for information. They provided everything, to my knowledge, that was requested by our auditor. But in other scenarios, they could have. And in that case, having one single auditor, or a set of auditors to govern both city and PUB would avoid that.
Yeah, I really don't know if an internal audit function would do what I think we're thinking that it,
Yeah,
Because it's
May
different
do.
than a forensic
yeah,
audit.
because, I mean, like,
I really
Mr.
don't
Gasco's put
think
it-
the internal audit is to, like here, you go and internally audit all these different departments on a regular
compliance,
basis. You do
right.
checks and balances
Right.
and all that stuff.
It's more your traditional audit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, it's just doing it internal and that information is given to your external auditor for reliance. I don't know if that works. I
I
mean,
don't-
I didn't
I-
disagree with you, but
I think
still that's gonna
what
give us we
everybody's
want.
talking about is more like an IA,
Yeah,
an
internal affairs.
internal affairs investigations office, frankly, right? I mean, that's what,
And you're right, it might not work. It might be just one channel that you wanted to open rather than the be all and end all.
You know, but what bothers me, what I keep hearing is that the city has very little, correct me if I'm wrong, but it has very little input into the operations of PUB, right? Doesn't have anything, whether they want to or don't, maybe they're not allowed to. For instance, you all have your own legal department here, correct? I mean, right, you guys are, right, which mitigates some of the, even though you still have to hire at times outside counsel for, for specifics. At PUB is the same thing. But they don't have their internal attorneys. But they spend quite a bit of money on outside legal counsel. So if the city wanted to say, you know what, you're spending $6 million on outside legal counsel, when you can spend $2 million and set up your own in-house attorneys.
and the city of Lubbock has that. They have their own general counsel for Lubbock Power
Yeah.
Light.
Well, I'm not talking about general counsel like we've heard so much about with PUB as of late. I'm
No,
talking
but
about
like
their own,
in-house.
yeah, their own
attorney.
in-house legal department.
and that's the thing with this whole Tenasca.
This ain't gonna save anything, but
That
I'm
was,
just saying.
yeah, like you said, I mean, whatever we come up with, is it gonna fix the problem? Probably not, unless it
It won't.
arises in that terminology. But it's a day-to-day business where Tenasca was being worked on, wherever it was being worked on, and it doesn't come before the board unless they need something approved. And then once the board approves that, well, it stays over there because it doesn't have to do anything with the city.
So Victor, you tell us, because what I'm hearing is that part of these charter thing is going to be to talk about board appointments, termination, clauses and whatever, and what else it is, what else can we do
Budget.
in order to mitigate? That's all I'm hearing is that, I mean, we're all over the place. So there's so many things going on.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's about appointments, who appoints, how they get removed. And that's all it appears that we can do based on a charter. I don't think that we can pass it or suggest a charter amendment that's going to give the city more oversight over PUB. I don't know if that's within our area. I don't think it is.
No, I think you have, no, to answer your question is I agree. But the impact that those little tweaks are gonna have, it's gonna have you're gonna have more regulation over it. The intent might not be there, but you're gonna have more eyes and ears. One, in the process of appointments. Two, in the process of terminations,
Of what?
of terminating, of removals.
Right.
Right, you're increasing the management relationship for the city in that aspect. I think you really gain management oversight when you start having to ratify PUB's budget. So I think you've identified four things, which are qualifications, appointments, terminations, and budget. And I think if you.
Did you mention qualifications?
Qualifications,
Okay.
appointments, termination, and budget. I think you do those four things, those kind of like your four high points. You're gonna add to the management without being too into the weeds of their day-to-day operations, which from a liability standpoint for the city, I wouldn't recommend.
How about, as part of that, that the city must ratify certain aspects of PUB operations? Ratify the budget, ratify increases in compensation to upper level management, as an example.
I think that might be a little too much. Again, we did not get into the Tanasca problems because of this,
Well,
really.
We didn't know.
But
the
look,
time.
the city commission did approve the rate increases that, the public is, having a lot of issues with right now. 4 years in a row. Is that right? Was it 3 years or 4 years? I think it was 2013, 2014, 2015.
Well, they approved the overall, they approved the overall plan, and the plan spread it out over.
They approved it over
Incremental.
that time. That's why it was automatic, right?
Right,
I said
yeah.
it was a one-time, but
It was
it
a
was.
one-time
it
They
took-
spread it out over
It took
4 or 5
4
years.
years. Okay. But that was the city commission. And, like we're not here to talk about who, oversight on the city commission, because, we understand that what was, according to the forensic audit, what was presented to the city commission at that point was not a full picture of the needs of the community. There was collusion according to the audit, right? So a bad actor, like a CEO who's doing things to purposely hide information from the board members, that is something that we are not, we're not going to solve with the charter amendment. And as, has been said before, we could do, something about being maybe a little more picky in selecting the board, things like that. But it really does not get to the heart of the problem. Really having a lot better communication between the city and PUB, I think that would go a long way. It does worry me to think that the city commission is going to have a lot more input into PUB, like ratifying the budget or having a say into salaries. We don't want the politicization of our power supply. We don't want it. We don't want it to be, a lot of the things that happened wrong with JBIC started because city commission got involved in managing those decisions. So it's something that we really need to be very careful about. We need to see in advance what might be the adverse consequences from the decisions that we make. And again, we need to be ready for another 2021 where we're gonna have PUB we may have PUB go bankrupt if we're not careful. And it may happen because of the way the city is now taking revenue, a percentage of revenue from PUB, and it's not allowing it to actually.
Well, but to clarify, I think that decision comes from PUB.
The what?
The net revenue that comes back to the city, I think that comes from a PUB decision. Because it's not identified in the charter.
It's the part of an ordinance. I send you the ordinance number.
It was a determination made by PUB.
So PUB determined that they were gonna give up 10% of its revenue.
And then brought to the city for approval. And
When did it do this?
well, when they passed the ordinance, I think it's a 2005 ordinance, I think it was.
It's a 2005 ordinance.
That's the way it would come up.
Okay, can you provide us with that ordinance?
Yeah, yes, you have, Yoli can send it to you, the 2005 ordinance. But all that's gonna show is what the ordinance said.
So you're saying that PUB can change that?
It can
That
submit,
PUB can
it can
choose
submit
not
a
to.
recommendation, like all changes from PUB. The way the charter's set up is all changes that come from PUB and we can verify this, but all changes that come from PUB have to come as recommendation to the city, and then city adopts, either approves or denies it.
Exactly. That's why
Right.
I state that.
The city
you know,
ratifies, and
Yeah.
then I think that goes to that. I think that the reason that we have some of the challenges that we have today is because the city was not involved. They were not involved. What happened, so the question would be, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but why were the rates, bottom line, why were the rates, I know it came from PUB, but why did they increase the rates when they did?
I don't know, sir.
I mean, I think we've all heard the rumors is why,
Yeah.
okay? And the city adopted it, right? And maybe at that point, you know, look, based on what is out there, I think we need to acknowledge that there's been some errors made. I don't believe that these charter amendments are going to fix those errors. But I think what we can put in the charter amendment is that give the city the authority to ratify a budget. And I think that they should, because that's been part of the challenge about the amount of compensation that some of these upper level managers were getting, is that the city must ratify that. I mean, I'm not saying don't, if the city or supermajority wants to do it, that's fine. But at least give the city the opportunity to make that decision, because right now they're not. And it's like I said, you got the tail wagging the dog. You know,
Yeah,
PUB's
well,
budget is
yeah,
much
well-
bigger than the city's.
What I would say there is, I mean, the city is approving the rate, and
Exactly.
any revenue that they get from the city approved rate, PUB should be able to do whatever they need to do, right? If it's pay people more within their budget, within the rate structure, I think it's fine, right? It's not really the salaries, in my opinion, that are affecting the decisions, right? On the contrary, normally if you want to get high caliber people, the same thing that the city did in the past, right, is get qualified people, and sometimes it's going to take more money, right? So if the city is going to be deciding that, I don't think it makes sense.
Well, I think it's, again, and it's not a point for us to talk about at this point, but it's the optics of it. We have to be sensitive to the optics that are out there. I mean, right now, the way it stands, if PUB wanted to give a maintenance worker a $500,000 salary, there's no oversight. They can do it.
Well, the
Yeah.
oversight is the PUB board.
Right.
The
And
city
Yeah.
does the same thing.
It
Yeah,
has,
exactly.
it has to go before
Exactly.
their board. And that's the
Can I-
thing.
If,
Go ahead.
if it's all right with y'all, I'd like to make a couple of points. With all due respect to the points that are being made are excellent. A practical fear of mine is that someday the PUB will bring forward a budget and propose it, and there'll be a city commissioner. Nobody on our current board would ever do this, but there'll be a city commissioner who says, I'm not approving that budget until I get new streetlights on my street. And we know that's already happened. We know that that has happened, and that sort of thing does happen. I need a new utility pole next to my site, and I'm not, or my best campaign contributor needs a new pole. They're not going to get it until when they get it is when I'll vote for your budget. I'm going to tell you something. I really love this idea of a potential for an internal auditor for one reason. If you look around the country today, it's not just because it's my idea, but it's mainly because it's my idea. If you look around the country today at internal auditors and what they've been able to accomplish in government, that has been historically the number one way that some of that really dirty stuff comes out. If an internal auditor working specifically for the city of Brownsville was the burr in the saddle, so to speak, over at PUB, an internal auditor probably would have discovered that there was.
but they have internal auditors, David.
But reporting to the city,
Right.
an appropriate reporting to the city saying, this thing with so-and-so is going on and we can't get enough information, or this do not, call it the non-disclosure agreement. We've read it because we have a right to read it, and we noticed that it's no longer in effect. An internal auditor, I'm just going to throw it out there. I'll let that discussion end with me now.
David, that is not a bad idea, but what you're doing is, not you, but what's being done is that you're shifting the employment agreement, because now all of a sudden, who pays them, the city or PUB?
The
Okay.
city.
Okay, so PUB pays them, then that's who they're going to be loyal to,
Well, but
whomever's paying
if
them.
the city hires them and the charter requires, for instance, that the city is the one that hires, but the PUB is the one that pays.
You can do that. I don't have any problem
In
with
the
that.
charter, you could do that.
I have no problem with that at all. But if we're getting that, and I don't disagree with you, but if you're getting into that, then what's there to preclude having some say-so in the budget, having some say-so in compensation? I know you hire good people, yeah, but I'm not saying don't do it, but the city's got to have some oversight into the top-level management compensation. I mean, they should.
Well,
Why wouldn't they? If it's,
I
Because
wouldn't
of
say that they
sizes.
wouldn't,
well, but
wouldn't or
again, the
couldn't.
supermajority takes
But-
care of a lot
So,
of that.
Mr. Cascos and
But
Mr.
it's
Merrill,
another situation where you've got a city commissioner who says, well, I don't happen to like this guy.
we can,
That's why you need
so,
five. That's why you need five affirmative votes to do
For the,
something.
I'm talking about, now,
For the
I will,
House.
just real quick, I will say that I have been privy to, because I have attended PUB presentations on capital improvement, projects to the city commission. In other words, and it was not something that happened overnight or where it was one meeting. It was multiple meetings over time to build an awareness on the part of the, city staff, city manager, and the city commission. So that sort of reporting, in order to get, and you've done this yourself, you've been around when this happens, the county commissioners or the city commission has to make a decision about issuing bonds. And they have to endorse that. So the whole process that leads up to that is inclusive and somewhat transparent. So I'm not, it can be done.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that internal audit is the be all and end all. I'm just saying, to me, if you look at the Justice Department today, the U.S. Justice Department, the only really good, solid information that is damaging to the department itself is coming from its own internal auditor.
Mr. Merrill, Mr. Cascos, I think we have a lot of homework to do.
Okay.
We
and
do-
Thank you for your patience.
We
I
have,
appreciate it.
no, just to clarify, we have a discussion or research into maybe what other cities are doing as far as requiring a supermajority in and out, charter amendments as to the qualifications, amendments as to the board appointments and their termination, possible amendments for budget ratification, and provisions related to auditors, citywide and PUB auditor. And then also I heard a recommendation to govern or to have ratification over top-level compensation. I think we can bring you some more this meeting. We're not going to solve all the issues today.
No,
Um,
exactly, because, I mean,
but
other
we-
than,
but
I'm
we do-
sorry to interrupt, other than Tenasca, you know, what other projects didn't come to fruition and they wasted money on there that we don't know about?
We don't-
Yeah, so,
See,
Go back, just go back to your point on the internal, and I'll close it with this from my part. On the internal audit, I think if you have PUB paying, it's all optical, right? Maybe have the city pay.
Yeah.
They're employees of the city, but PUB reimburses the city for those funds. And that takes care of where the allegiances are going to be with the internal audit.
and actually Denton has a good model for, again, picking and choosing from these different models. Denton has a good model in which it says that it does share some services with, the city shares some services with their utility company, and that they're appropriately reimbursed for those services. So it's, I mean, we already have something to go to. And then the last thing before we go to our action items, I did want, Ms. Zamora, it's on page 49 of our charter in your packet. It's section 3, subsection 2. They set up two funds. They set up a plant fund and an improvement and debt retirement fund. And it's in
I'm
that
sorry, can you slow down? So page 49?
49 of 54.
Okay, go ahead.
And so you see that subsection 2, that talks about the second fund is for the improvement and debt retirement fund. So my understanding on that, where it says fifth, any funds then remaining in which in the discretion of such board are not needed for any of the foregoing purposes may in the discretion of the board be transferred to the general fund of the city. And so that's, and then that's that general term that we're talking about. And then by the boards, by PUB boards, my understanding is by PUB boards, recommendation and then ratification by the city, then they pass that ordinance that kind of dictates what that percentage is, but that percentage can change.
Could you go to number one? I mean, there it says 50%, right?
Right, and so that's surplus fund of the plant fund, that's a different fund.
Okay.
At least that's my reading of it, yeah.
Yeah, why don't you
Income remaining in
check
the
that?
plant fund at the close of each fiscal year. They're
To
just
the
different
general
funds.
fund of the city, the sum of 400,000 to the extent available or an amount equal to 50% of the surplus funds, whichever is greater, provided the payment of such minimum sum shall not be cumulative.
Yeah, so that portion talks about plant fund, and then it talks about the improvement and
So that, this is
Uh,
really interesting. So
debt retirement fund.
my understanding is that in 2021, PUB suffered its greatest loss in history because of the freeze and everything that they had to pay for the cost of energy. And how is it that they're able to suffer such a great loss but end up transferring almost double the amount to the city that year? Because, so their revenue was a lot higher because there was, the energy costs were greater. So they had to purchase at a much higher price than normal. And because of that, revenue was higher. So then based on the formula that the city uses to collect, that money from PUB, that led to PUB being in the red. And so that seems to be in contrast with this. I believe at the time, the PUB board did ask the city if they could waive that transfer of money since PUB was, was essentially like stuck paying all that.
Yeah, I remember
from
that. That was
their own
last
funds.
year,
Right, so-
2021. I can't answer the management decisions for you.
I know, but this is, what it says right here is actually not what is happening in reality, because there were no funds remaining, and it was the discretion of the board that those funds were needed for foregoing purposes.
Yeah.
So PUB needed that money to provide me electricity, right? To provide
Well,
all of us who have PUB
With-
electricity.
in all fairness, I think there was a little bit more information that was provided by PUB. I vaguely recall the meeting, and I think representations were made by PUB that
That it didn't need the extra money and it was fine being,
no, I don't. I mean, it's public. I mean, we can revisit it, but I'm just saying, I don't know what the management decisions were for that. The chart,
Right, right.
the charter hasn't changed and the
but
ordinances
I
haven't
don't
changed.
think, like, the reason I bring up the management is because it was not up to management, really. Like, it was a decision that was made not by charter, but by ordinance. And the PUB board does not have the power to change that, which is in conflict with what is in the charter right now. That's what I'm getting at. The way that the city is operating right now in regards to the transfer of money seems to be, and I may be wrong about this, so this is a question. But
I
it
see.
seems to be
I
in
see what you're
conflict
saying.
with charter.
With to your question earlier is how can there be a conflict between the charter and this? And so again, to my explanation is that provision there is very general. And so when general versus specific come to a head, the more specific rules.
But in Article 4, it's really not
I tend to disagree. I
general.
mean, this section's all under surplus funds, right? And so there's a section called Section C, surplus funds. And there's a very specific provision that says 50% of the surplus funds. And then going on to 2, there's a different fund within surplus funds, right? Maybe we agree, but I don't know if there are 2 separate funds, but they're all from the surplus. But you need to have the utility be a functional utility. I think that's
Right.
to Daisy's point. And so, 10% of revenue is different than 50% of
Profit.
surplus funds.
Right.
And so to the section C2, I'm looking at it and I think that's kind of whether it's first or second, I don't know if that makes a difference in the in kind of the statute or the ordinance flow, but it's specifically for improvements in debt retirement, right? I mean, so that's a separate fund, again, from surplus. I mean, I think that there may be a.
I also, I know we had a request to, and I have to apologize, requested, Mr. Sampaio, to give a presentation, from the PUB's perspective. He will be at the next meeting next week. And so when it comes to like the mechanical parts of this and how it impacts PUB, I think he could provide more information about that. And also we could bring our finance department director to kind of.
From a legal perspective, I don't believe there's a conflict. Well, I believe that there is a conflict. If there was an ordinance that deals, that's kind of the charter hook, let's say, like, you know, they have the constitutional hook. The charter hook is going to be a provision that deals only with improvements in debt retirement.
So, yeah, I agree.
I don't
If we look at C, right, and it has two subsections.
Right.
It talks about surplus funds, but it breaks that surplus funds into two subsections. One for the plant fund and one for the improvement in debt retirement fund.
Right.
I think, so the plant fund, it says there 400, or an amount equal to 50%, whichever is greater. I don't know what that number is for the city. And that's where I say, I think the finance director could look into that. We could bring you that information, what those numbers are. It could very well be that that's the intent, is that there's also this improvement in debt retirement fund, which seems to be the final excess, the final surplus of all those numbers, and in which that very fifth last portion would make sense.
Yeah.
Where it would say, okay, if there's anything left,
Right.
then the board can determine what that is. And it's my understanding, we can confirm at the next meeting, we'll vet all this out and give.
Yeah.
I may be entirely incorrect. I'll just say that right now, but the way I read it and from what I know is that that's where the ordinance provision kicks in.
When it comes down to the specific trumping the general, which is canon of law, statutory interpretation, I think there's a specific here. And the specific is 50% of surplus funds goes to of surplus.
From the plant fund.
From the plant fund, but.
And then you have
But
another
it's-
surplus, and then you have another surplus from the improvement and debt retirement fund. And what I want to get you, the true data on is the 10% that we're all talking about coming in from that second surplus fund, which it's my understanding it is, but I can confirm that for you.
Victor, I think we need to identify what surplus means.
Yeah.
Okay, because within the surplus fund, which I think is a fund balance, right? You've got restricted items and then you have unrestricted. So you may want to find out from somebody what that surplus number
understanding
means.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think it's-
does that mean, I mean, because they've encumbered stuff for capital improvements, well, that comes out of that surplus fund. And what I read here, that it could not be cumulative. So it's got to be the surplus, which to me, the surplus fund at the end of any given year is your net revenue. That should be what the surplus fund is.
And if that's a point of confusion, then that's definitely like the purpose of the Charter Review Committee, is to make that more clear.
I think
Right.
it needs to be clearer. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
I think you got the exact point. What is surplus funds?
Yeah.
Here, because this capital improvement, I mean, are we
I
telling?
think they've got a definition.
Has anybody looked at the PUB, their latest PUB audit? If you go to, like, if you just go to the balance sheet and it'll tell you there, and I don't think it's going to say surplus funds. It's going to be probably fund balance or restricted, unrestricted. And then you have all these encumbrances in there. So the surplus fund, they could make it be zero. Really, they could make it be zero by just moving it up to, you
That's a
know.
VPA
To
talk.
Yeah, I mean,
capital improvement. Yeah,
I'm in my world now, man.
They
You know,
could
but I
identify
think
capital
they can move
improvements,
that
right,
number
real
into
estate
capital improvements. All of a sudden you've got
Real
zero
estate,
surplus fund.
real estate,
And I
whatever.
think it's probably our job to kind of consider whether there needs to be a check on that.
What it is, yeah.
Yeah. there
So,
needs to be a
so what I can do at the next meeting, I'll set this for like, this will be like our workshop item this time around. And I'll try to get, our finance director and also
It shouldn't take long. I mean,
PUB's
just-
finance director, just to
Okay.
kind of really explain how this clause works out and
Yeah.
what those numbers are.
That'd be
Because,
really great.
then you'll be able to identify how to clear it up.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to suggest that we move to table a couple of these issues so that, because I think the most contentious item of the whole night will end up being when we meet next time
I second.
and how that schedule works.
Yeah,
Yes.
Daisy seconded it. I don't know what she seconded, but I'm not sure what David said.
Well,
but-
I also think we've had a lot of discussion on these 1E and then 3C, which is what we're talking about.
The business items other than the decision about meetings, I would like to table.
So I think I've spoken enough, and Mr. Trevino will.
Oh, I have to.
Mr. Trevino will walk us through our meeting dates.
Are we going to talk about meetings?
Yes.
Yes, that's what we're
I just-
discussing.
I'd like to recommend that instead of every Thursday, because we're already missing one because of Thanksgiving, but, you know, that we move the meetings to Wednesdays at 5:30. I think Victor indicated that might work better for you guys as well.
For the most part, for staff and accessibility to this room, it does work out.
So I would move that and then whenever there's a change, we can do it, but within the 72 hours, but that we move our regular meetings to Wednesdays at 5:30.
Sure, and Mr. Trevino has a quick
Yeah, well, just
graphic to show.
because I know everybody's had a lot of discussion tonight. November 16th is a Wednesday. This room is available, but I think there is a couple of you that might not be available for this coming Wednesday,
Yeah.
November 16th. I don't want to,
I'm not available.
you're not available?
Yeah, I'll
okay.
be out of town.
Out of town.
Out of town. Okay. Is there any other?
On Thursday too?
No, I'll be back on Thursday, but I have I'm on the workforce board, so we have a meeting on Thursday.
Yeah, see, so.
Okay.
So
With the exception of
have to go
that
anywhere work for you.
Wednesday, every Wednesday
can't
from
make
now
it.
until
That's correct.
February is available.
I didn't hear that.
With the exception of next week, with Mr. Martinez being out, every Wednesday from now until February is available for you all. Is
Well,
my understanding.
Well, Mr. Martinez can't make it
No, well, he's
Yeah.
gonna be out of town.
Thursday either.
No,
right?
I'm
that's why.
okay for next week, you know, I can watch the video.
Oh, okay.
catch
So,
up. I don't have any
but
issues.
Wednesday's okay or that's not?
Yeah, Are Wednesdays okay for you for the remainder of the?
Yeah,
the
I think I
meetings?
sent my calendar, so.
Okay.
if-
Yes,
Yeah, I
I think
couldn't open
there
it.
was, the 28th was the only one where it had, I think, 4 individuals that couldn't attend, but, yeah, you know, as Mr. Martinez is okay, just Skyping in, I think we'll have enough quorum in person to
Yeah.
conduct the meeting.
Okay, so my motion is for Wednesdays at 5:30.
A second.
The second question I have, I mean, I guess y'all have to do a vote on that.
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nobody
Unanimous.
opposed, right?
Aye.
Okay, great. So we are supposed to have 2 meetings out in the community. And given the Wednesdays that everyone is available, that could either be towards the end of December or January. So looking at December the 14th, which is a Wednesday, December 21st, January 12th, or January 19th.
I would get them out of the way. I would do it on December the 14th. It'd be fine.
Okay. So December 14th.
And where?
This would be the Brownsville Event Center.
Oh, the event center.
The event center.
Event center.
Packed house, man.
Well, there'll be plenty of parking, so you
Yeah.
should be fine. Glorious parking.
Glorious parking.
So December 14th.
And where would the second one be?
Same place.
Same place.
Same place? Okay,
Yeah.
so both community meetings would be at the event center.
Yeah.
I think the board wanted to try to keep as much consistency as possible for the public.
So December 14th is one.
And-
Did y'all want to do December 21st? Or move that one to January?
I'd rather
January
do the
12th?
14th because that 21st, you're getting close to Christmas already.
Okay. So then December 14th, and then the other one would be, because it has to be 2. The other one would be, I'm sorry, January 18th.
That's fine for me. Is
Okay.
January 18th.
that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. And those, both days are Wednesdays, right?
I think Mr.
Yes,
Merrill had a
both days are
motion.
That'll work.
Yeah, the motion is that we conduct the public hearings at the event center on the 14th of December and the
18th of January.
18th of January
Correct.
There's a motion.
At 5:30?
I
at
second that
5:30.
motion.
Thank you.
Is that a motion, David?
That was a
It
motion.
was, and I think Mr. Martinez seconded it.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Oh.
Any future, and again, just a reminder, we kind of have 3 buckets set up. I think we're still dealing with Article 6 of the charter. But if there's any other provisions that you might want to see at the next, we have, like I said, we have those items I listed earlier that we'll bring back. With some
Yeah,
kind of-
there was, I mean, I think it's maybe a typing error, but I'm not sure. On page 45,
I like it. Mr. Martinez has been into this charter. Got some.
yeah, it says there, section 5D for Article 6, section 5D, and there's no section 5. And you gave me a new copy, there's no section 5 there, so.
What page was that again, Mr. Martinez? Sorry.
Page 45 is the third line from bottom. Or right before that, it says Article 6, Section 5D of this charter, where it's talking about net revenues. And 4D, I thought maybe it was 4D and it has nothing to do with it, so. Yeah, I wanted to understand, to the sum less than, 150 of the aggregate average annual requirements for payment of principal and interest. So that's what I was understanding, and then I went to find the section, and that's not it. Found a couple of
think
other.
I have 5D on page 29. 5D on page 29. It's
49?
I heard 29.
Oh, you know what? It's referring to Article 4. So there's an Article 4, Finance, Section 5D, that says, term net revenues. So they put a 6 instead of a 4.
Yeah, it looks like they inverted,
The
The
V1,
numbers.
yeah,
so that would be something.
yeah, we'll change that.
Mr. Flores, could I ask a question? What's the appropriate manner for us to be able to share? For instance, let's say I have a history that I think is worth knowing, one pager that I'd like to share with the other members of the committee. Is it appropriate to circulate that unofficially, or should I present that as part of the record?
You know what? I think it'd be good also for the public to have record of that. I mean, we are recording these
I don't
meetings, so.
object. I just want to make sure that I don't step on anybody's.
No, we'll set you up for a presentation.
Well, or just.
Or just, yeah.
Just deliver is all I was going to do, but.
I was thinking more for the public if
Okay,
we can put it on the
okay.
screen.
In the meantime, how, we have this open meetings restriction in terms of our ability to make decisions, as I recall. Are there any other particular conversations or communications that you'd like for us to either restrict or not worry about?
Yes, just really quickly, I know some members are new to board service. We are under a Texas Open Meetings Act, and so any communications on items before this board, even if it's in a series like a telephone game, that would be a violation of TOMA. The best way to do it is if you have a question, forward it to me. You and I, each one of us can have a one-on-one conversation as far as legal issues, any concerns you might have. And if it's for the group, then I can put it on the agenda and we can talk about it as a group.
Or just don't speak to more than 3. And you're good.
I know there are people on this committee
Well,
that are familiar
well,
with that I am.
Don't put us on a thread, okay? I mean,
Until that third person picks up a phone and
That's
says,
right.
hey, by the
Don't
way,
put
I
us on
heard
the
X, Y, and Z.
Thank you.
With that said, I think the last one is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
7:29, meeting has ended.
Thank you all. See you next time.